Hello everyone, I hope you all are doing well. Today we are going to look at the case of the Butterfly Man, or the case of Mae Griffin. Now this case is highly disturbing, very interesting, and it is actually a vintage true crime case. And I recently heard about this case from the Morbid podcast, and they recommended a book called Bloodthirsty Louisiana that I also read in preparation for this case. It has some vintage true crime stories from Louisiana, and it's very interesting, very dark and disturbing, but if you like reads like that, I would definitely check that book out. It's very good. And I thought we could just take a deep dive look at this case because it's very sad. It's really heartbreaking, and it's just a very bizarre case. So I really thought it was interesting, and I got a lot of my information from the Morbid podcast as well as that book. So definitely check those two things out as well, because they are both really great sources for this story, and it's just a really interesting case. So let's go ahead and dive into our case. And again, this is a very dark and disturbing case that does involve a younger girl, so keep that in mind when you are watching this video. On Thursday, April 12th, 1934, a man named Jackson visited a woman's home. Her name was Mae Griffin, and she lived in Shreveport, Louisiana with her daughter Mae. The family was very poor. Maggie's husband had just passed away not too long before this incident, and during that time it was a lot harder for women to work. They often had to work as maids and other jobs like that, like a lot of like home type jobs, and so it was really hard for women to make money at that time. And so if somebody's husband passed away or the main breadwinner of the family passed away, women really suffered during that time. And Jackson visited Mae and Maggie's home because he said he was going around town trying to find a maid to work for him and his wife. He said his wife was very ill, that she was struggling to keep the home clean, and she was struggling to cook and really do anything. She was mostly bedridden, and that he needed somebody to come and cook and clean for him. And at first, Maggie said no, and so did Mae, and they just felt really uncomfortable about the situation because they didn't know the man, and this was, not a really large community, so, everyone kind of like knew each other. People were at least like somewhat familiar with each other, and so they said no. And over the next couple hours, Jackson returned to the house several times and begged Mae to please come and meet his wife, at least meet her, just so he can introduce them and see what like the job duties would be. He said he visited all these other homes in the neighborhood and everybody else said no, and he was desperate because he, his house was dirty, he had nothing to eat, and so he begged Mae. And finally, later on in that afternoon around 1 o'clock, Mae agreed. And Maggie was not really happy. She didn't want Mae to do this, but Mae knew that she had to take care of her mother. And so she wanted to make money and, take care of her family. That's just the kind of girl she was. And she was also engaged to get married that year, so she knew she needed some money coming in. So she decided to go and meet Jackson's wife. Now, Jackson gave Maggie his home address just in case she wanted to come by and see everything too, and they left. Mae and Jackson left the home, and Maggie stayed home, but she had his address, so she was not worried at all about this situation. So after about an hour or two, Maggie started to get very worried about Mae because she was such a young girl and they didn't know Jackson, but she had his home address, so she decided to go to the home. And when she arrived there, she found out that Jackson gave her a fake address, that he did not live there, and Maggie immediately started to worry. So she alerted the police, and she alerted friends and neighbors, and her friends and family and everybody around started to look for Mae. They searched all throughout the town thinking that maybe Jackson took her somewhere, and for the next couple days they continued to search for Mae, and they never found a trace of her. Nobody had any idea what happened to Mae. So a couple days passed by, and on April 15th at around 8:30 to 9 a.m., a young boy named Will Marion and his friend Albert Green were cutting through their local forest to go fishing at the lake. And the two boys were very familiar with this area. They often went fishing at Cross Lake. That's where the town's like water supply was and the town's like fishing supply. So a lot of people were very familiar with this area, and these two younger boys were very familiar. They cut this way all the time, and it's a really nice time of the year. They were walking, it was like spring, so it probably smelled good with all the flowers, and it was like lush and green, and it was probably just like a really great day to be out. And the boys were just enjoying themselves, and they stumbled upon what they thought was a pile of clothes in the woods. And a little bit farther ahead of them, it's like a little bit off into the distance, Will notices this first. He sees what he thinks is a pile of clothing covered with wood and covered with leaves. And so they decide to investigate. They step a little bit closer to the body, and they find that it is a woman covered in leaves. Now, Will and Albert were both young guys, and they were also black. And during this time, it was especially dangerous to be a black person. And crimes would happen, and the black person that lived nearby, normally like the black man, would get accused for it and unfortunately hung many of the time, sent to prison. They would automatically oftentimes blame it on a black person. So I believe that the two boys probably felt a sense of panic when they came across this body. And they said, quote, or Will said rather, quote, "We were walking through the woods and I saw something piled up in a cluster of brush. And I told Albert, I see something, and he said, well, what is it? And I said, I don't know until I get there," end quote. And Albert told him, again, he believed it was a dead body, and when they stepped up on the body, they realized exactly that's what it was. And Will told Albert, like, let's not get any closer to this, because this was obviously back before DNA, but they had to have known like to not go super close to the body. So, and when you read the book Bloodstained Louisiana and articles from this time, newspaper clippings, it seems like the young boys were making it very obvious that they did not do this crime, which I think is really sad, because that's got to be horrifying in the first place, to stumble across a dead body, but also to worry that you're going to be killed yourself for finding this body. But they decided anyway to do the right thing and go to town and tell someone what they found. But it's very obvious that they were trying to let police know, and they let like the media know and newspaper clippings and things like that, that they had absolutely nothing to do with this, and they made it very known right away. So I thought it was very interesting, because I'm sure that they were horrified, and they could have just left her out in the woods, this body, but they decided to alert somebody. And so they went to town, and they alerted a shop that was probably like the closest shop that they could go to, I would imagine. And they told the shopkeeper that, they found a body out in the woods. And so they alerted the police. The shopkeeper called the police, and the boys went back out into the forest, because the shopkeeper didn't want to go. He would not, escort them back. But the boys actually went out to the forest and waited for police to arrive for 2 hours. So the first to arrive on the scene was Sheriff Thomas Rowland Hughes and the Chief of Police, Dennis Baser. The coroner also came with the police, and his name was W.B. Butler. And the coroner brought his, tools and everything he needed to examine the body, and he discovered that the body was, laid on its back. The woman was laid on her back, and that her legs were intentionally spread out. He also noted that one leg was turned up, like bent at the knee, and the other leg was straight out. He also noted that the right arm was covering her heart, and the other arm was splayed out on the side. The body was also surrounded by leaves and wood, and they believe that the perpetrator attempted to set the body on fire but was not able to do so. The coroner also noted that this body belonged to a teenager around 15 to 16 years old, and that they believe that the body was purposely posed this way, and that the killer left the body this way on purpose. And between her legs, she was laying on her back and her legs were kind of like spread out odd, the killer left items from her purse, her bag that she carried with her, between her legs like in a stack. And it was a face cream, a scarf, and a hat all stacked up between her legs. The killer left his bloody knife at the scene, and they also believed at this point that she was sexually assaulted because her clothing was hiked up and again her legs were spread out. But he took her in for an autopsy right away, and the autopsy notes are absolutely terrifying. So when they performed the autopsy, they discovered that this body belonged to Mae Griffin. Of course, she was reported missing during this time, and her family was able to identify her. And they found that Mae was around 15 to 16 years old. In both articles and everything that I read about this case, it said both ages, so I'm not sure, but that's still very, very young, right? So she was 5'4", about 112 pounds, and she had long auburn hair that was soaked in blood. And during the autopsy, they found a large wound on her neck that had maggots on the inside. So the coroner determined that she had been deceased around 2 to 4 days, and of course she went missing on the 12th, so she was deceased for a couple days at that point. And he also noted that she had been cut several places in her neck from ear to ear. She was cut many times, like 4 times from ear to ear on her neck. She was also stabbed several times in the abdomen, and she had cut marks on both palm prints. And it was determined that the 4 major cuts on her neck is what would have eventually killed her because it cut through her trachea and jugular. There was also a large bruise on the side of her neck that was thought to be made by like a thumb or maybe like fingers pressing into her neck. There were also several tears in her vaginal canal that showed that she was sexually assaulted very aggressively. And what's very sad to me is not only did Mae's body have larvae like inside of it and also on the wound, it's also the fact that Mae fought very hard for her life. On her hands and like all on her arms, she had several defensive wounds, such as like cuts and bruises and broken fingernails, and she fought very hard for her life. And I think that that's something that's very important in true crime, and that's something that I have personally learned and kind of like told myself that if something bad were to ever happen to me, like if you come at me, you're gonna know that you're in a fight with me. Like I'm gonna bite something off, I'm gonna scratch something, you're gonna know that you did something to me. Whether I die or not, you're gonna know, because I'm gonna get you right back. So I definitely think that's important, and unfortunately, sometimes in cases you don't see that the person fought hard because maybe they were scared or they didn't know what to do or the person caught them by surprise. But, I was very surprised to see that Mae fought so hard. She was very determined, and she really fought the killer very, very hard, and like her hand wounds were very severe. So the coroner noted that in his autopsy that she fought this person very, very hard for her life. And I just find that to be so sad because she really, wanted to live, and she had that like I'm gonna escape mentality, and she fought so hard, and that just absolutely is heartbreaking. So at this point, after Maggie identified her daughter, and police started working with Maggie to find out exactly who this person was, who Jackson was. And Maggie gave a physical description of him. He was about 55 years old, she believed. She thought he looked like an older man. And she, gave the address. Police double-checked everything, and they couldn't find him at first. And so they started asking around the town because at this point, Maggie was very distraught, right? I think she felt very bad about letting her daughter go with this man. She felt very regretful, and I'm sure felt like it was her fault because, her husband passed away and the family was doing very badly, in the money department, and so she felt really bad letting her daughter go and trusting a stranger. So I feel like at this point, Maggie was very like hysterical, just from what I was reading, and so they looked on the outside for help. So they started asking neighbors if they had seen this man, if they'd seen an odd person walking around town, if they saw anybody with Mae. And several people around the town stated that Mae was seen with this man. He looked older, and everyone said he was like a handsome man, and that he was probably like in his 50s, like a little bit of a shorter gentleman. And everybody seemed to have positive things to say about him. And some people said that they saw him selling these little like paper butterflies around town. They're made out of like paper and fabric. I'm going to see what type of pictures I can find because I know exactly what they are. So I'm hoping I can find some good pictures to put on the screen. But people wore these during that time, like in their hair and on like their blouses and things like that. They were just like little like kind of paper mache butterflies. And this man sold them around town. And they saw Mae with him and, you know, most likely didn't think anything of it. But there was one neighbor who felt really off by this man, and he called himself Jackson as well to her, and he attempted to sell butterflies at her home, and she was able to give another physical description. So he also went to a neighbor very close by Maggie's home as well. So once police had a physical description that several people gave, especially the neighbor matched exactly what Maggie said, they started to search all of the local towns and the local areas. And this took them about 2.5 hours away to a town called Tallulah, Louisiana. And this is pretty far, I feel like, during that time for a criminal investigation. I feel like you know, back then, especially when you hear about serial killers and things like that in like the 80s and further back, towns didn't really communicate with each other. So this is pretty far to go back, especially in the 30s. So police arrested 3 men in Tallulah that matched a similar description to what Maggie gave and what the neighbor gave and what, you know, of course, other people in the town gave. And these men are Frank Lockhart, A.J. Jackson, and J.A. Conroy. Now, these 3 men were mostly known as drifters. They also sold items to basically eat. It's believed that they were all mostly like homeless. And so they were, you know, easy targets. They basically fit the description of somebody who might do this because, again, Jackson gave a fake address to the home, so they believed that this person was like a transient. So at first, police believed that A.J. Jackson was their guy because of the name Jackson. He didn't, you know, maybe give his first name, and he also very closely matched the physical description that Maggie gave. But when they brought the 3 men back to Shreveport, they brought Maggie to the jailhouse to identify him. And she saw J.A. Conroy outside of the building. He was apparently like pacing. I'm sure he was nervous. And she identified him right away. She said, that's the guy, you know, but again, she was very hysterical, hurting, very upset. This was just like a couple days after her daughter had been missing, and she just found out that her daughter was murdered. So of course she was hysterical, and police did not believe that J.A. was their perpetrator. And during this time, the word got out that a child rapist and a child murderer was in the local prison. So this started to attract a mob crowd outside of the prison, and people were getting very upset and trying to break into the prison. And just 2 days after Maggie was found, on April 17th, the other man who was arrested, named Frank Lockhart, broke down in prison and admitted to killing Mae. He said that he felt bad for J.A. Conroy taking the heat for this, and which absolutely blows my mind because he never seemed to feel bad for killing Mae, but he felt bad for somebody else taking the blame for this crime. So that just shows like what type of person he is, and that his whole like self, his person was very bizarre and weird, because why would you feel bad about that? A lot of criminals don't feel bad when somebody takes the fall for their crime. A lot of murderers especially, they're happy that they're not caught. So it's just very odd to me that he felt bad about that, but he didn't feel bad about killing Mae. And he told police that basically he tried to have sex with Mae. He took Mae to the forest. He said his wife was down at the lake, at Cross Lake, fishing, and that she would come back soon and that they should just wait there. So essentially he just tried to like grab Mae, and she pushed him off, like slapped him off. That's what he said. And, you know, again, like I said, she was getting engaged, and it seemed like her and her fiance really cared about each other because he extensively helped with this case, and he extensively helped with searching for her. Like, he was there for her family. And so he just like grabbed Mae, and then when she fought him off, he just kept trying to like grope her and grab her, and eventually stabbed her in the abdomen. He pulled out a concealed knife that she, did not know that he had, and stabbed her on the side, and that actually punctured her liver. So then, after she was hurting, he then aggressively raped her and then killed her. And then he said he just left her body in the forest and, covered her with leaves so nobody would find her. And from what I read, I don't believe he admitted to trying to set her on fire, but it does appear that he tried to by putting so much like wood and everything around her body. But I don't believe he admitted to that, but he did admit to just raping, killing her, and then just leaving her in the woods. And because Frank stabbed Mae so many times. She had many cuts and stabs on her abdomen. Of course, her neck was slashed like 4 times. She had cuts on her hands, fight marks from trying to like fight back at him, defensive wounds. So Frank was very aggressive with her. He aggressively murdered her, and it was at the point where it was definitely overkill because he just kept going. And so this showed police that he was a very dangerous person, and they definitely started like looking back into his older crimes to see what else he may have done, and they were absolutely shocked to find that Frank went by an alias. And Frank went by the alias DB Napier, and he was 38 years old, but when you see his picture, he looks a lot older and he looks rough. So, that's why I believe so many people thought he was like in his 50s. And because of this, and he also probably like smoked, and like everybody smoked back then, and drank, and he was essentially homeless. He was living in like basically like kind of like a homeless shelter that was located under an overpass. And he actually did have a wife. Him and his wife both lived there. And he claimed that he was actually going to hire Mae, which I don't know how, because he barely survived selling these like butterfly pins that he sold in the town. But he claimed that he actually was going to hire Mae. That's why he took her there. And then when she refused to have sex with him, somebody who was over twice her age, almost 3 times her age, he decided to kill her. So his aggressive behavior was out of control. And again, he used this pseudonym, this DB Napier, because he already escaped from prison. He was serving life in prison for previously aggressively raping a young woman. And he escaped from prison when he was like working in the yard out one day, and so he was on the run, so that's why he used that pseudonym name. And Frank was 38 years old, despite media reports saying that he was in his 50s. And when you see photos of him, he did look pretty old, like he looked bad. And of course, during that time, like everybody smoked and, drank really heavy, and so, he looked like he was living a really rough life, and he was essentially homeless. And Fred used a fake name, another name that he went by called DB Napier, and he used it to remove himself from the life of crime that he had been, living this whole life. He'd been doing some terrible crimes for quite some time. And he was also known around town as being the Butterfly Man, which is really scary because that's what the neighbor of Maggie's called him, and unfortunately that's like what he became known as, and that's why this is called the Butterfly Man case. And I just found that really scary because it's like, you think like, oh, these pretty butterfly clips, and then he was really, finding an ulterior motive to go out and sell these things, because he later told police that he knew Mae. He saw her throughout the town, and he had a fascination with her and thought she was really beautiful. That's why he kept coming to her home. He really didn't ask other people to come work for him because he wanted to have sex with Mae. And Frank lived in essentially a homeless shelter for, homeless people in the area that was under like an underpass in Shreveport. And many other people who lived in that area, they also sold items to basically just eat. And that's what Frank did for him and his wife, who I believe she was very ill, like she had some issues. And so he basically went out and sold these butterfly clips while they both lived in this like homeless shelter. And he claimed that the story that he told Mae and Maggie was true. He said that his wife was ill and he was going to hire Maggie to actually take care of his wife, which I don't see how because he was homeless and he barely had enough money to eat. But he said, quote, "And we went down the road and hit the Greenwood Road and then went across to the golf course and went to the next street, and there was a little dim road that led off the lake, and I told her my wife was down there fishing and we would wait for her. She sat down and I put my arms around her and she hit me," end quote. So at this point, the detectives knew they had found their guy. They had a confession from Frank and they let AJ and JA go. And at this point, again, there was like large crowds around the prison trying to kill Frank. There were people, causing the crowds to become more angry. There were women like calling people cowards if they didn't kill this man. And, the crowd was just getting very intense. And every police and firefighter actually had to be on the scene to keep the crowds under control. But they did eventually break into the building. About 200 people made it into the building and they were attempting to find Frank. But he was held on the 7th floor at that point, so they were not able to get to him, and the police were eventually able to get the crowds under control. And this caused like a lot of damage to the building. During that time, it was, probably like a couple $100. Nowadays, it would be like outrageous. And this did cause a lot of damage to the courthouse, and this did cause a lot of damage to the local prison, and police had to start like basically threatening people to like leave the area, and they were like spraying people with hoses and things like that because they didn't want to completely destroy the prison where they hold people, and they especially didn't want to give Frank an opportunity to escape. So they basically gave him life in prison instead of the death penalty. And Leo Frank was being held at a prison in Georgia, and Frank Lockhart basically was working with this lynch mob, so I'm assuming he was very racist as well, probably hated Jewish people and hated black people. He was just very like anti-Semitic, and he basically worked with this lynch mob to bust in this prison, break Leo Frank out. Frank Lockhart drove him to where he was going to be hung in the forest. And so police discovered this and they were shocked. They were shocked that he was supposed to serve life in prison for raping a girl, and that he basically drove a man to be murdered. So they knew that he was dangerous and that he was not a safe person to be around. So they took him to trial immediately. And the Leo Frank case is something that I'd actually like to make a video about. If that's something you guys are interested in, let me know. Because there's actually a research team right now that is currently working on this case. And I looked it up. It's really interesting. Trying to, exonerate him of this crime. Trying to pardon him because they feel that he did not do anything. There was hardly any evidence besides the fact that he was in the building that day. So they're trying actually really hard to solve this murder. Of course, it was a long time ago and that person has passed away by now, whoever did it, but they still want to pardon Leo Frank because what they did to him was horrible. And I accidentally stumbled across pictures while I was looking this up. They're really horrible. So, reader beware when you look up this case. It's horrible. And it's absolutely terrible that Mary was murdered and so sad. But during this time, like I said, if you were Jewish, black, any other race, sometimes a woman even, you were blamed for crimes and they would hang you like nothing. So I just feel really bad for Leo Frank because I feel like he didn't do anything. I feel like he was just at the wrong place at the wrong time, and unfortunately he was murdered because of it. So if that's a case you guys would like me to cover, let me know because it's very interesting, and I'm really into vintage true crime cases as well. So let me know if that's something you guys want me to do. So the trial was really fast. Like all of this happened between April 12th and April 23rd. Like this was really super quick. And the courtroom was packed with people. Of course, like this town was heavily invested in this case. I believe there was like 200 seats in the courtroom and everybody was packed in. There were people standing everywhere listening to what was going to happen to Frank Lockhart. And Maggie ended up being the main one to testify, seeing Jackson or Frank Lockhart at her home. She was able to like identify him and point him out and say that he gave her the wrong address and everything like that. And of course they already had a confession, so it was basically open and shut anyway. And Maggie actually apologized to J.A. Conroy for, you know, publicly accusing him of this crime, and she, you know, said she was sorry, which I thought was really nice because she was really hurting, and to, you know, apologize when she's going through such grief, I thought was very big of her. And, you know, they basically, like, this trial was like 3 hours, and Maggie's testimony basically like nailed his coffin shut because she was able to, you know, explain exactly what happened, and then you know, talk about how her daughter's body was found. So it was really quite sad. The trial only lasted like 3 hours, and the jury deliberated for only 5 minutes, and they found Frank guilty, and he was given the death penalty. And Frank was hanged on May 18th, 1934, just like a couple weeks later, without any trouble whatsoever. And so I found that really interesting. All of this happened in like a month. Like, it was really fast, like a month and like almost a week. It was a really fast case, and I don't think that it would have been so fast if Frank did not basically admit to it right away. And I wonder why he did. I don't know, maybe he just felt very pressured, or if he was just, you know, feeling bad for J.A. Conroy. That's why he just decided to do so. But yeah, this case was really bizarre and sad, and I'm happy that they found Frank and this didn't just go like as an unsolved crime. And I just feel really bad for Mae because she just seemed like a very strong young woman, and just wanted to make some money to help her family out, and she was brutally murdered and raped. And you know, her mother lost her husband, and then she lost her daughter in such a terrible way. This case just really like definitely hit home for me, and it was really sad, and I don't know, it just really bothered me a lot. I really found it very sad. And yeah, if you want to listen to more about this case, I would definitely check out the Morbid podcast. It's very interesting. Check out the book Bloodthirsty Louisiana. And Morbid is actually putting out a book, and it's called, I believe, The Butterfly and the Wren, and I actually pre-ordered it, so I'm really excited to read that. I'll do like a review or something if you guys want me to. But yeah, I really just thought this was an interesting case, so definitely check out the books if you're interested. The book, I can't remember when it said it was coming out. I just pre-ordered it and didn't really look at the date. But yeah, it's all a very interesting case. So if there's anything else you guys want me to cover, any vintage true crime, any major cases that are maybe like unknown, like big cases that we don't hear about anymore, let me know, because I'm always interested in reading about these things. And just let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, because I found this case just so heartbreaking and just really devastating, just so sad. And you know, I just felt really bad for Mae because that was just such a sad way to go, and she was so young, so that was absolutely terrible. But let me know what you guys thought about this video. If you found it informative or helpful, please leave me a thumbs up and hit that subscribe if you like true crime. I put out about 1 to 2 videos every week. So otherwise, that is it, you guys. I'll stop rambling now. I hope you guys have a great day and stay safe out there. Bye-bye.